There's a quote from our source material today that really just hits the nail on the head. If Scrum expects teams to adapt to reality, then Scrum must also be allowed to adapt. Think about that for a second. Have you ever felt like the framework you're using at work is just fighting a losing battle against the messy reality of your actual job? Well, today we're diving into a text that challenges a huge assumption in the corporate agile world.
Welcome to The Explainer. I am super excited to take you on a bit of a cinematic journey today into the evolution of Scrum. We're breaking down some absolutely incredible insights from a text called When Scrum Learns To. We're going to look at how a framework designed entirely for flexibility somehow becomes rigid, and more importantly, how we fix the whole shebang. Let's jump right in.
All right, part one, the promise versus reality, when the framework meets the real world. Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer contrast. On paper, right, textbook Scrum is beautiful. It applies so neatly to teams, sprints, and products. But then it enters a real business, and actual humans get involved. It literally smashes right into organizational realities. We're talking competing business goals, strict delivery expectations, cross-department dependencies, and just the everyday constraints of real life.
And that collision brings us to the absolute core engine of Scrum, empiricism, which is basically just learning from reality through inspection and adaptation. Now, we constantly apply this principle to the products we build, right? But the source material points out something that honestly isn't discussed enough. That exact same empiricism absolutely must be applied to Scrum itself. Which leads us to part two, when Scrum creates friction, the danger of rigid implementation. So, friction erupts the second Scrum is treated as this fixed, unchangeable implementation instead of a learning framework. And man, the symptoms are painful. Teams start to feel totally boxed in, management feels completely unsupported because the framework just isn't speaking their language, and suddenly, Scrum just becomes this massive point of resistance rather than a tool for alignment. But let me be absolutely clear about this one thing. Adapting Scrum to your organizational reality is not an excuse for micromanagement. It is definitely not command and control behavior in disguise. Evolving the framework doesn't mean abandoning agile values at all. It means honoring them deeply enough to make them actually work in your specific environment. Moving on to part three, turning empiricism inward, inspecting and adapting the framework. So I want you to ask yourself, is your Scrum a boundary or a bridge? Really think about your own organizational setup right now. Is your daily process a wall that keeps people apart, or is it actually connecting them? See, when Scrum itself is inspected and adapted, it can finally fulfill its real purpose. First, create transparency. Second, enable collaboration. And third, help teams and management move together towards shared outcomes. That's exactly how the framework transforms from a rigid boundary into a vital bridge. Okay, let's dive into part four, adaptation in action, estimation, a practical example. Let's look at how this plays out with estimation. Under a really rigid implementation, estimation often devolves into just tracking human capacity. This actively weakens empiricism and traps us in fixed predictions. But when we let it adapt, teams naturally shift toward estimating using story points. They learn from each and every sprint, and progress becomes visible through real empirical trends, not just brittle forecasts. This kind of balanced adaptation is just incredibly powerful. Scrum's flexibility supports team learning, which gives them real ownership, while simultaneously giving management the clarity they desperately need to make informed decisions. It basically proves that the framework can evolve responsibly within a real organization, if you just let it breathe. And finally, part five, the living framework, Scrum as it was always meant to be. I absolutely love this quote from the source material. Listen to this. This is not textbook Scrum versus reality. This is Scrum practiced as it was always meant to be. Practicing Scrum honestly means emphasizing its core principles, transparency, inspection, and adaptation. It means allowing the framework itself to evolve based on real-world outcomes. When we actually do this, the wins are massive. Scrum becomes a unifying structure rather than a rigid constraint. It naturally aligns teams and management right around actual delivery goals. It doesn't force conformity. It doesn't create unnecessary resistance. Ultimately, it enables deep collaboration, clarity, and sustainable progress across the whole organization. Now, the incredibly valuable insights we've explored in this explainer today are based entirely on the work and writings of author Rahul Tingati. It's a masterful, grounded look at how agile methodologies genuinely need to adapt to survive, and I highly recommend checking out his work.
Tongati leaves us with this really profound summary. Scrum does not succeed because it is followed perfectly. It succeeds when it is understood deeply, practiced honestly, and allowed to learn alongside the organization it serves. Which leaves me with one final question for you to take away today. Are you trying to follow Scrum perfectly, or are you actually allowing it to learn alongside your organization? Think about that the next time you open up your sprint board. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.